The man had his workshop tucked behind a shuttered bait shop off Route 17, the kind of place you wouldn't notice unless you were already lost. I only stopped because my phone died, and the gas needle dipped low enough to make my chest tighten. The sign outside was hand-painted, the letters warped like they'd been carved with a dull knife, wood and figurework. Inside, the smell hit first. Old sap, rot, varnish, something sweet and sour underneath. He stood in the back, tall and bent, hands blackened as if the stain had soaked into his skin instead of sitting on top of it. He didn't greet me, just watched. That's when I saw it. 6 feet tall, standing upright in a crude wooden case like a coffin that forgot its purpose. The sculpture was unmistakably Egyptian. Elongated skull, sharp nose, arms crossed over its chest in the posture of a pharaoh. The detailing was obsessive. Every groove in the headdress, every fingernail. The eyes were carved deep and narrow, shadowed in a way that made them look closed, but alert. "What wood is that?" I asked. The man smiled without showing his teeth. "Old," he said. "Already remembers things." I laughed, because that's what you do when something unsettles you, and you don't want it to. He told me it was unfinished, that it needed a home to set. He offered it for a price that didn't make sense, less than a cheap dresser. I told myself it was a conversation piece, a joke, a 6-foot mistake I could resell later. Getting it into my house took everything I had. The case scraped the hallway walls, leaving pale scars in the paint. When I finally stood it upright in the living room and pried the lid open, I froze. The sculpture's face was different. Not much, just tighter. As if the mouth had been carved a fraction deeper, as if the eyes, still wood, still hollow, were angled ever so slightly toward me. I stepped back, heart hammering, and told myself, wood warps, temperature, humidity. Fear does funny things to perception. That night, I woke to the sound of wood stretching. A long, slow creak, like something inside my house was waking up and remembering how to stand. I lay there holding my breath, counting the seconds between sounds. The heater was off. No pipes ran through the living room. The noise came again, wood rubbing against wood, deliberate this time, a faint thump, as if something heavy had shifted its weight. I told myself it was the case settling. New house sounds always feel louder at night. Still, I didn't sleep again. Morning light made me brave. That's how it always works. Fear shrinks when the sun's out, becomes something manageable, something you can scoff at while making coffee. I stood in the doorway to the living room, mug in hand, and felt my stomach drop. The lid of the wooden case was open. I knew I had slid it shut before bed. The nails were old, loose, but not that loose. The sculpture stood exactly where I'd left it, arms crossed, chin lifted. But the angle was wrong. It faced the hallway now, faced my bedroom. I circled it slowly. The wood grain along the torso seemed darker, as if damp. There were thin cracks along the shoulders that hadn't been there before, spidering outward like veins. I reached out and touched its arm. It was warm. I yanked my hand back hard enough to spill coffee down my wrist. The burn grounded me, made me angry. I laughed, sharp, too loud, and told the empty room I was losing my mind. Heat rises, sunlight through the window, simple explanations. But when I crouched and looked inside the case, I saw the floor beneath it gouged with fresh marks. Parallel lines, deep enough to catch a fingernail. Drag marks. That night, I set my phone to record. I propped it on the bookshelf facing the sculpture, plugged into the charger, screen dimmed. I didn't even bother pretending I'd sleep. I sat on my bed, fully dressed, listening. At 1:17 a.m., the sound came again. This time it wasn't wood stretching. It was a wet click, followed by another, slow and careful, like joints testing their limits after centuries of stillness. The air smelled different too. Dry, dusty, like an old tomb cracked open. The recording caught everything. The sculpture's head moved first. Not smoothly, it twisted in short, jerking increments until the hollow eyes pointed straight at the camera. Then the arms, God, the arms, uncrossed with a sound like splitting bark. When it stepped out of the case, the floorboards screamed. And from somewhere deep inside its wooden chest, something breathed. I didn't realize I was screaming until my throat burned. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the floor, but I didn't move to grab it. I couldn't. My body had locked itself in place, every muscle rigid, as if staying still might convince whatever that thing was to forget I existed. The breathing wasn't like ours. It came in uneven pulls, dry and rasping, as though air had to be dragged through passages that hadn't been used in a very long time. Each inhale was followed by a faint grinding sound, wood rubbing against wood from the inside out. It took another step. The floor dipped under its weight, not the hollow knock of wood striking wood, but a dull, solid thud. Too heavy. Too real. I whispered, "No," over and over, the word barely leaving my lips. Its head tilted. The motion was wrong, not animal, not human. It leaned as if listening, the carved headdress creaking as the neck shifted. The cracks along its shoulders widened, splitting just enough for something dark to show beneath. Not empty space, not shadow. Something dense. Something packed tight. It raised one hand, fingers stiff at first, then loosening as they flexed. Fine dust rained down from the joints. When it placed its palm against the wall, the drywall bowed slightly inward. That's when I ran. I didn't think about shoes or keys or the car. I just bolted down the hallway, slipped on the rug, slammed my shoulder into the door frame, and locked myself in the bathroom. The light flicked on, harsh and buzzing, and I dropped into the tub, knees to my chest. The breathing followed. Slow. Patient. Closer. Each step made the mirror tremble. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. I could feel it through the floor, through the pipes, through my own teeth as they rattled together. Then it stopped. Silence stretched so tight it hurt. I dared to look up just as a shadow passed beneath the bathroom door, long, vertical, blocking the light from the hallway. The handle twitched once, twice. Wood scraped metal. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the door to burst inward, for splintering, for pain, but none of that came. Instead, the shadow shifted away. The breathing receded, each step slower than the last, until there was nothing. I stayed there until morning. When I finally opened the door, the living room was empty. No sculpture, no case. Just deep gouges in the floor leading toward the front door, and the smell of old dust lingering in the air, like something ancient had finally remembered where it was supposed to go. I stood there for a long time, staring at the marks, trying to understand how something that size could leave my house without waking the neighbors, without shattering the doorframe. The front door was still locked, deadbolt untouched, chain hanging loose like it always did. The gouges didn't stop at the door. They turned. I followed them outside barefoot, the concrete cold and gritty under my soles. The morning was too normal. Birds, a passing car, the distant bark of a dog. The marks crossed my porch, cut through the thin layer of dirt beside the steps, and disappeared into the trees behind my house. That's when I noticed my phone. It lay in the grass near the tree line, screen cracked, still recording. The battery was dead, but the last frame burned itself into my mind anyway. The sculpture standing inches from the camera, its face so close the grain of the wood looked like skin, and its eyes, they weren't hollow anymore. I didn't call the police. I didn't tell anyone. What would I say? A wooden Egyptian statue walked out of my house and into the woods. I spent the day scrubbing the floor, sanding down the gouges, repainting the walls. By evening, the living room looked almost normal again. Almost. That night I boarded up the windows. I shoved furniture against the doors. I slept with the lights on and a hammer in my hand. At 3:42 a.m., the smell came back. Dust. Resin. Something older underneath. Dry. Sour. Wrong. I sat up slowly, heart pounding, and listened. There was no creaking this time, just a soft, deliberate knock at the front door. Once. Twice. Then a sound I hadn't heard before. A voice, rough and splintered, forcing air through a throat that didn't remember how words worked. "Open," it said. And when I didn't move, it spoke again, closer now, right against the wood. "You carried me home." The words slid through the cracks around the door, dry and flaking, like they'd been scraped together from memory instead of learned. I couldn't tell how it knew. I didn't want to know. My grip tightened around the hammer until my knuckles went white. "I don't know what you are," I said, my voice shaking despite my best effort to steady it. "But you need to leave." Silence followed, not the absence of sound, but a held breath. Then the softest laugh, if you could call it that, rasped from the other side. It sounded like two pieces of wood being rubbed together, slow and deliberate. "I am what was sealed," it said, "what was named and unmade. You broke the case." Something pressed against the door, not hard, not yet. The wood bowed inward just slightly, enough for the frame to creak in protest. Images flooded my mind unbidden, sand and heat, hands wrapping linen, resin poured thick and black, a face carved to remember a man who had already been erased, a punishment, a warning, to be bound not in flesh, but in form, conscious, trapped, waiting. "I didn't mean to," I whispered. The pressure eased. I felt it withdraw, retreating a step. When it spoke again, the voice was closer to me somehow, like it had learned the shape of my fear. "Meaning ends. Binding remains." The lights flickered. Once, twice. Then the living room went dark. Wood cracked. Not the door. The walls. A deep, splintering groan rolled through the house as something tall shifted its weight outside, moving along the exterior, testing. Feeling. I backed away slowly, heart hammering, until my calves hit the couch. The hammer slipped from my sweat-slick hand and clanged to the floor. There was a sudden thud above me. Dust rained from the ceiling. Then another. It was climbing. I ran for the basement, lungs burning, the smell growing stronger with every step. Behind me, the roof groaned under impossible weight, and I knew that wherever I hid, it would follow. Because I had brought it somewhere new. And it was done waiting. The basement stairs were steep and narrow, each step creaking loud enough to feel like a betrayal. I slammed the door behind me and threw the bolt just as something heavy landed on the roof above, the impact shuddering through the beams and into my bones. The single bulb at the bottom of the stairs flickered on, casting the room in sickly yellow light. Concrete walls, exposed pipes, boxes of things I'd never bothered to unpack from my last move. I backed into the corner, chest heaving, and listened. The sound came from above first, slow, deliberate footsteps pacing across the ceiling, testing the structure. Each step was followed by that same grinding internal noise, like something shifting inside a hollow shell that was no longer hollow at all. Then the footsteps stopped. For a moment there was nothing. No breathing, no movement. I almost convinced myself it had left again. The door at the top of the stairs bowed inward. Once. Twice. Hairline cracks raced along the wood, radiating from a single point dead center, as if a palm had pressed against it and decided patience was no longer required. Dust sifted down through the seams. The bolt rattled in its housing. "I didn't know," I shouted, my voice echoing off the concrete. "I didn't know what you were." The pressure paused. Something scraped along the door, slow, vertical, like fingers dragging down its surface. When it spoke again, the voice came through clearer now, stronger, no longer struggling to shape the words. "You knew enough to take me," it said, "enough to free me." The door exploded inward. Wood splintered and flew, the bolt shearing clean off as the door crashed against the far wall. It stood in the doorway, filling it completely, head nearly brushing the ceiling. The cracks along its body had widened into deep seams, splitting the carved wood apart. Through them, I could see what lay beneath. Layers of hardened resin, dark and glossy, packed tight around something dense and vaguely human in shape. Its eyes glowed faintly now, not with light, but with awareness. It stepped onto the basement floor. The concrete cracked under its weight. A jagged line split outward from where its foot touched down, spidering across the floor with a sharp snap. Dust puffed up around its legs, clinging to the resin-dark seams in its body. Up close, it smelled worse, old pitch and decay, like a sealed thing finally exposed to air. I scrambled backward until my shoulders hit the wall. There was nowhere else to go. It tilted its head down to look at me. The movement was smoother now. Practiced. The thing was learning, moment by moment, how to use the shape it wore. "You fear breaking," it said. "You are fragile. That is why you bind." "I didn't bind you," I gasped. "I bought a statue, that's all. Someone else did this to you." Its fingers flexed, joints popping as resin cracked and shifted beneath the wood. One hand brushed the ceiling pipe, bending the metal with a dull groan. "They are gone," it said. "Names lost, bones turned to sand. Only the shape remained. Only the watching." It took a step closer. My back pressed hard into the concrete. I could feel the cold through my shirt. My mind raced, grasping at anything. Logic, bargaining, prayer. "What do you want?" I said. "If you wanted to leave, you could have. You already did." The faintest pause. "I want the weight returned," it said at last. The words settled over me like a sentence being read aloud. "Returned? To who?" I whispered. "To you." Before I could react, it reached out. Its hand closed around my forearm, not crushing, not yet, but impossibly firm. The wood was hot now, feverish, and the contact sent a jolt of pain straight through me. I screamed and tried to pull free, but it drew me closer with effortless strength. The seams in its chest widened. Inside was no heart, no organs, just layers upon layers of hardened resin wrapped around a hollow shaped exactly like a man. My shape. "I carried you," it said, voice deepening, filling the basement. "Now you carry me." The resin inside its chest began to soften, turning glossy, wet, alive. I felt it tug at me, not physically, but somewhere deeper, like a hook sinking into my thoughts, my memories, my sense of self. The walls blurred, the basement faded, and I understood then, in the last clear second I had, what the wooden case was really for. Not storage. Transfer. The word reverberated in my skull, echoing against the bones in my head like some dreadful drum. I felt it, warm, sticky, impossible, sliding into me, seeping into the marrow of my body. Every nerve screamed in recognition. The wood wasn't just alive, it was hungry, and I was the vessel. I tried to pull away, but the grip on my arm was absolute, unyielding. My vision blurred, colors melting and recombining into strange, jagged patterns. My own heartbeat sounded alien, thundering in my ears. "You made me whole," it whispered, its voice 1,000 splinters pressing into my skull. "Now I make you mine." And then the pulling began. Not like hands dragging flesh, but like the world itself was being unwound from inside me. Every ounce of weight, every thought, every breath drawn into the shape beside me. My knees buckled, my stomach pitched. I screamed, not a human scream, but a broken, splintered sound that tore from the core of me. The wooden thing bent forward, absorbing, reshaping. Its cracks widened, expanding across the surface of its body, revealing the black, glossy interior that now shimmered with fragments of me. My eyes, my hands, my chest, memories flickering like burned film. I clawed at its arms, but my fingers passed through resin and shadow as if I were reaching into water. My voice was gone. My body was gone, almost. And then it stepped back. The basement was quiet. The single bulb flickered, casting a weak light over the mess of splintered wood and concrete dust. I should have been terrified, but I wasn't. I felt dissolved, diffused, something less than human, but more aware than ever. The wooden Pharaoh stood in the center of the basement. It looked smaller now, perfectly upright, perfect and whole. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't outside of it. I was inside it. My thoughts, my memories, my awareness, all stored in the resin and grain, every fragment folded neatly inside the wooden shell. It turned its head slowly toward the stairs and whispered in my voice, "Let's go home." The weight of my body, of my former life, pressed against the walls of the wooden form. It wasn't suffocating. It was comfortable, predetermined. The house creaked around me as if it too understood the transfer. Or perhaps it was just echoing the settling of something ancient being freed. I moved, through the wood, through resin, through the carved body that had once been lifeless. My mind flexed with awareness I'd never known. I could see the grooves in the ceiling beams, the edges of the walls, every shadow, every vibration. I was aware. I was alive. But not human. The house smelled of pine and dust. Outside, the morning was ordinary, silent, waiting. I felt the weight of the world press against the wooden surface, ready to walk out, ready to take everything with me. I didn't know if I would return. I only knew the Pharaoh was awake, and so was I. Awareness didn't come all at once. It unfolded, layer by layer, like hands peeling linen away from a body that had been wrapped too tightly for too long. I could feel the house through the soles of wooden feet. Every vibration translated cleanly through the grain. The basement no longer felt like a room. It felt like a container that had served its purpose. I climbed the stairs. Each step was deliberate, heavy, confident. The weight I'd once carried in muscle and bone now distributed itself differently, settling into joints that did not tire, legs that did not tremble. I understood dimly that this was how it had always been meant to feel, balanced, enduring. The front door loomed ahead, still barricaded, still locked. I raised my hand, though the fingers were long and carved and ridged with tool marks, and pressed it against the wood. I felt the door before I broke it, the grain, the weak spots, the way the hinges would give. Knowledge without learning, memory without experience. The door burst outward in a rain of splinters. Morning air washed over me, cool and sharp, carrying the smell of grass and asphalt and distant exhaust. Sunlight struck the carved face, warming it instantly. I stepped onto the porch and felt something inside me settle, as if a long journey had finally reached the correct latitude. Neighbors passed at the end of the street. A woman jogging slowed, stared, then laughed nervously and kept moving. A man walking his dog paused, frowned, and tugged the leash harder. None of them screamed. None of them ran. They saw a statue. They always would. I walked. Each step carried me farther from the house, from the life I'd worn briefly and clumsily. I felt memories shift inside me. My name, my job, my past. No longer central, no longer sharp. They flattened, spread thin, becoming texture instead of identity. In their place rose older impressions, sandstorms, chanting voices, a sky without wires, hands carving, shaping, sealing, a face designed not to resemble a man, but to outlast one. I understood now why the carver had smiled, why the price had been wrong, why the case had felt like a coffin that didn't quite fit. The weight had to go somewhere, and it always chose those who carried things without asking what they were. As I reached the tree line at the edge of the neighborhood, the wood of my body creaked softly, not in pain, not in strain, but in satisfaction. The cracks sealed, the seams smoothed. Inside, I felt myself settle deeper, pressed gently but firmly into place. Waiting, watching, ready for the next hands willing to take what they don't understand.